Hi everyone, this is the last lecture of the series, and today we're going to focus on the topic of heritage. My name is Hoyin LEE, just call me Hoyin. I used to teach, I'm teaching architectural conservation at the University of Hong Kong, and I used to teach architectural design as well. So I'm glad I'm off the hook now, no longer have to teach architectural design. So today we are going to talk about something that's increasingly relevant to Hong Kong's conservation scene. And until recently, Hong Kong's conservation mostly has been focusing on pre-Second World War building. So building of 19th century and up to the early 20th century. But I think increasingly we are seeing more and more buildings that are more modern looking. Dating back to more recently, like in the 1930s and even after the Second World War. So this is not only peculiar to Hong Kong, but increasingly I think all over the world, people are beginning to see the mid-20th century buildings as becoming important heritage, and that is what I'm going to talk about today. And the original title of this talk, is from Moderne to Modern, and architectural heritage of Art Deco and Bauhaus tradition. And then I thought, maybe I should have a slightly more interesting title. So the more interesting title is, what has the airplane, the ocean liner, speaking of ocean liner, Ultraman, a Sony transistor radio, and the Apple iPhone got to do with Hong Kong's modern architectural heritage? Okay, so that's the title. So and before I go into the subject matter, a little bit on the different professional disciplines approaches on dealing with heritage building. I'm trained as an architect, and I know some of you here are architects. The typical architect's approach to examining buildings, whether it's new or heritage, is that the architect study building from the point of view of people who design and executed the buildings. So from the angle of ideology, and form, space, function, technology, aesthetics. So architects deal with a lot on aesthetic. They don't deal with calculation. That's the engineer stuff, and so we architects tend to think that that's beneath us. You have to do calculation and leave it to engineers. And the anthropologist approach, they also deal with traditional buildings, not so much heritage, but traditional building. They study traditional building from the point of view of people using the building. So in terms of lifestyle, way of living, value system, tradition, and beliefs. And for historians don't really study heritage buildings. They study the key people and events associated with historical buildings. So that's what they do. And what about architectural conservationists, like I am, some of you are, And for us, before I go into that, I mean, in many ways, from all these other disciplines approach in looking at heritage building, is a little bit like the blind people, the probable blind people trying to feel the elephant, and they all end up understanding part of the elephant and not the whole, So for us, architectural conservationists, and if you ask us, what do you do? Well, we'll say it's complicated. And the thing is that we architectural conservationists seek to understand heritage building through the point of view of the social, cultural, and social historical circumstances of the people for whom the building were created. So architects, they look at buildings from the point of view of the people who designed, created the building, and anthropologists from the point of view of the people using the building. And for conservationists, and for historians, they look at the point of view from the point of view of people, important people related to the building. And whereas for conservationists, we look at heritage building from the point of view of the circumstances, that created the building for a kind of building and for whom, Okay, so in other words, and we like to think that as conservationists, we try to understand the whole elephant by massaging the whole elephant. Okay, so that's what we do. So let's massage the elephant, and we go to modern architecture. And I use the word modern here. If you can read Chinese, and the word modern and it can roughly equivalent to the Chinese term in Putonghua is modern. Modern is a borrowed term, a borrowed Chinese term from English, probably maybe the French too. I don't know, because after the Republican Revolution in 1911, and China, there was the time when China first began to modernize, and it was realized that there were a lot of concepts, a lot of things, that is becoming familiar in the West, is completely alien to the Chinese culture. And to understand those ideas, those concepts, and you have to create the term, the name for it. And the most expedient way was simply to synthesize, Western word, and and incorporate those words, into the Chinese language or vocabulary. And modern, and the synthesized word is modern, is one of these words. And there's a joke going on. Say another this early synthesized Western word is humor. So then, and the Chinese term for it is humor. Humor is humor, obviously. And so the joke is that well, maybe the Chinese we don't have the concept of humor. So to some extent that's true, and because Confucianism, you look at the Confucian classics, nowhere you can find that the idea, even the hint of humor is mentioned. And I mean, humor is not like the kind of slapstick thing that make you laugh out loud. Every culture has that. So, but the humor in the Western sense, that make you kind of laugh, subtly, feel funny, and but in a more deeper intellectual way, I mean, that is probably not that's absent, in traditional Chinese culture. I think Confucianism is quite hostile towards humor, right? They don't encourage people to laugh. They want us to be serious, study hard, get married, have lots of children, preferably sons. So modern architecture. And so when did the world first wanted to become modern or modern, in the Chinese sense, that is before the modern meaning of the word. And if you look at the popular culture in the 1930s, and one very good representation of the desire to become modern throughout the world is in Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, 1936 movie. And you can see from this movie, it's a depiction of a lot of machine. So from this you can get a sense that the machine become a symbol, almost like an iconic representation of the desire of being modern, and also the actuality of being modern. And you look at China, it's exactly the same thing. In the 1930s, it depicts a poster like this, depict what was then the modern China. And this is actually a depiction of the city of Shanghai. And the city of Shanghai was the wealthiest, well, I think today is the wealthiest as well, and the most modern city in the whole of China. And you can see, this is a good representation of the aspiration of China, and as well as and so similarly, for the rest of the world of wanting to become modern. And the imagery of being modern is seen here. Modern building, building that was seen as modern at the time. For example, this building here, this hotel. This is today a hotel. We live here. We stay here in our Shanghai study trip. You don't remember that?
We stay in the student hostel.
Oh, okay. Sorry, not your time. Okay. Whoops. Anyway, this was the tallest building and the most modern building in Shanghai at the time, 1930s. And you can see besides the high-rise building, you get airplanes, flying in formation, and cars, So although it's less conspicuous here, so the idea of a modern machine become a icon, a representation of a representative of what is modern. And another picture here, this is shown more clearly, and planes, crisscrossing each other, just like the one previously, like flying in formation. In real life, you will never see plane doing things like that, and of course, like tall buildings, lots of cars, So, and this is and if you look at another poster, this is Seattle. USA 1920s, so the idea of being modern came to the West, sooner than it came to China. So you see, so what is the representation of modern? What are the symbols of modernism? Modernity, I should say, not modernism. So high-rise building, and planes, of course. You always have to have planes, and ships, and big ships, ocean liner, preferably cars, and trains, and there's a crane here as well. So you see a lot of machine. And then you look at Germany. I'm not used to this computer. 1927, a very influential movie. This is a sci-fi movie, Metropolis. So it's a depiction of, again, besides tall buildings, it's a machine, robots. And if you have seen the movie, you see that it depicts a future world where the whole city is running on a lot of mechanical machines. So again, it's about machine, and this is sometimes in the architectural field is known as the first machine age. This is the early 20th century, especially around the time of 1930s. That was probably the peak of the industrial revolutions, in that the machine became mechanical devices, and this mechanical technology matured, as a fully matured as a form of technology, and matured in the sense that they become commonplace, that and to serve people. It's no longer something that is experimental or something that's very rare. Just like today, we are going through, some people will say, the second or third or even fourth machine age. Now we're into the electronic digital age, where computer once upon a time was extremely rare and experimental. But today, you have, everyone has one in the pocket, and in your phone. And and how does that impact on the design of architecture? And that would be in the form of Art Deco style. And so this is the connection to the French. So I have to say something about the connection to the French, otherwise it won't fit into the theme of this lecture series. So you can blame the French, for bringing modernity to architecture. And it started in 1925 during the Paris Exposition, the Paris Expo. And well, I will try to pronounce this. I know I'll pronounce it very badly. International des Arts Décoratifs et Industriels Modernes. And I was told that if I hold my nose, and speak with a very nasal voice, then you can't roughly sound like French. But anyway, so this is a modern industrial decorative art international festival expo. So it's all about this expo. The theme is about particular modern style, of aesthetic style that has the potential of becoming international. That means universal, and is related to the industry and related to modern, and so eventually it did become the dominant architectural style, globally through the 1930s, and this is what the exposition, or rather parts of it look like. So you see that the pavilion, what we call pavilion, and even today, most of the pavilion is in this World Expo, is more like a projection of the architecture of the near future. So expos have become grounds, to showcase future architecture, and this is exactly what happened in the 1925 Paris Exposition. So you see architecture that is very different from what is seen around France, especially in Paris. So in Paris you get building like this, so that kind of French, the French version of the classicism, and very ornate and very classical, of course, and but you look at this, this is very clean and very simplified, and so this is what the expo is trying to say this is the kind of style that will be the future of architecture. And it did. It became for several decades, and it became the style. And what am I doing? Okay. And before Art Deco, there was classicism, as you have seen here, in the lower part of the building. That was commonplace in the Western world. And then what's classicism? And classicism, and you could say, it's the first attempt to use mathematics, and to discover mathematical proportion, and what is appealing to the eye, and from the ancient Greek, and then carried on by the Romans, and in a very, very simplified version is that the Greek discovered that in nature, including human beings, and there's a proportion that's very appealing, and which is 1 to 1.618 something, what they call the golden ratio, and they find it everywhere, and so they try to apply this into the development of architecture and put it into rules, so that the whole composition will become intuitively appealing to the eye. And during the Renaissance, it was picked up by the Western world again, and so Renaissance is more or less a form of classical revival. And you have the famous Da Vinci Man, and this made famous by the movie Da Vinci Code, and it shows that this rather creepy naked guy, and it shows that what he's trying to show is that the human proportion, the human body, has a hidden relationship with basic geometry. And so if you extend your arms and legs in a certain way, fit right into a circle and a square. And the circle and the square in classical architecture, and later adopted by the postmodernists, is that this is the basic building blocks, building geometry for architecture. So that's why the circle and the square is so important. And so back to classicism, and the discovery of the golden ratio is a very important basic building block, for classicism. So everything, if you strip everything down to the most basic, you find that it's all based on the golden ratio, the golden proportion. And so much so that there is even a golden ratio mask. So this is a mask on the right, and if this mask fit perfectly onto your face, you're considered good looking. So yeah, and see. Yeah, like that. So I think there was a BBC documentary, and what's that? Elizabeth Hurley, yeah, beautiful woman, right? And then there was a guy from Monty Python, another guy who's not a good-looking face, So they're comparing, and they find that Elizabeth Hurley's face fit into the classical Greeks' golden ratio mask. So anyway. But you can see, this mathematical basis, is supplied throughout into art. Okay, if you look at classical art, you find that it's a very formal style, and if you superimpose, this golden ratio grid onto it, you find that the intersection actually touch a lot of key points, and then can start to more or less, can have an idea of how the artist begin to compose, this painting, and it's a very formal style. It's representational. That means it depicts things in a very realistic manner, almost like a photo, And it's talk about epic story. In this case, I think it's Socrates, School of Athens, and or even biblical, creation of man. So grand stories, And so you can see, the golden ratio, and how Adam is framed within one golden ratio, and God within, and the angels are within another, And when they crisscross, they form another golden ratio rectangle. And and after in 1925, that was when the modern revolution in architecture began, with the French Exposition. And architects begin to realize that maybe this is a chance, to have a form of architectural aesthetic that we can completely break with tradition, and break free from this almost 2,000 years of influence by classicism, and so Art Deco eventually became in architecture known as the Art Deco style. So instead of a formal way of depicting things, in art as well as architecture. So, and the artists, Art Deco artists, we start to become less formal. So in a very abstract, almost, well, we can say almost look a bit like a cartoon way. So it's no longer so representational. So instead of a grand epic biblical story depicting Adam, so and now become like Adam, my lover, Adam, my boyfriend, or my husband, Okay? And the same thing, and then later is translated into architecture. So in architecture, classicism, you have very realistic depicting of plant, animal, and so on, and very formal, exactly like a classical painting, and it's based exactly on the golden proportion. And then when it comes to Art Deco, things become very abstract. So instead of all these rules, classical rules in the form of orders, you have just lines. So vertical lines, horizontal line, even when they have to put in anthropomorphic detail, so in this case a lion, the lion is no longer realistic like the HSBC lion, but it's more like a abstract lion, very geometrical. So, and you see throughout the entire Art Deco movement, from art to graphic design to sculpture and then to architecture. So everything is based on almost like breaking down, simplified into geometries. And so you see, like for example, this Art Deco painting, and also the sculpture. And it kind of remind me of the first generation 3D Street Fighter video game. Everything is not smooth and kind of like a blocky. And what about architecture? And architecture really started towards the end of the 1920s. So, and there's no Art Deco architecture before the 1925. And this is one classic example of the earlier version of Art Deco architecture. And this is Chrysler Building, 1928. And you can see, the geometry in the architecture, instead of representational depiction of plants, animal, and whatnot. So circles, triangles, squares, and also the what they call the sunburst. This radial thing. This is another common feature in Art Deco architecture, and this is what it looks like today. And another classic Art Deco building is the Empire State Building, King Kong's favorite, and this is the tower on top of the Empire State Building in the original King Kong movie, and this is the more recent movie where this is King Kong, okay, right here. He hasn't shrunk, it's exactly the same proportion, except that in this drawing, he's standing here, and now, and in this image is right here, okay, and so you can see, a lot of lines, vertical lines, especially you can see here, lines, and the sunburst, you can see the sunburst over here, so very geometrical and nothing very representational. I'm sorry, I'm not used to this computer. Okay, and what about Hong Kong? Okay, Hong Kong, we used to have two, now we have one. Classic Art Deco, early Art Deco buildings, and the old HSBC building, which has been demolished, and the old Bank of China building, still there, still around. And you can see the kind of what in our conservation field is known as character defining elements, or you can call it characteristic architectural features, of Art Deco architecture, especially the early version. So a lot of lines, and geometry. Oops, sorry. Just keep jumping over the face. Yeah. So you can see on the picture on the right. So the top, the roof area, so horizontal line, and contrasting with the main body, the superstructure, where you have the vertical line. Oh, do you know that this old HSBC building here, this is actually a landing pad for gyro, what do you call it? The early version of the helicopter.
Helipad.
It's kind of like a helipad, but it's not helicopter. Had not been invented in the 1930s. It's an earlier version of it. It's called the gyro something, And if you've seen the James Bond movie, You Only Live Twice, where he fought the bad guy in a volcano, and so the movie featured one of those planes. Okay, but anyway, so that's why today the new the HSBC tower today you see has a helicopter landing pad. Is to continue this tradition. Okay. But it never worked. I mean, no. I think no pilot would be crazy enough to try to land a plane onto this little pad. And can see, from the Bank of China building, and this was finished in 1952. That is the completion date, but the design, I think started in the late 1930s, but because of the Japanese invasion and then Second World War and so on, and then after the war there was a Chinese Civil War, so the project dragged on, and didn't finish until China, changed hand, from the Republican government to the Communist government, and so that's why it's so late. The completion is so late, and it's almost like towards the end of the Art Deco period, but it looks like a very early Art Deco building. And so there's an interesting story about this, and the lions guarding the original lions guarding the front, the entrance, the main entrance of this bank building was an Art Deco, a pair of Art Deco lions. Okay, it's designed by an Italian sculptor, I was told, and but then when the government, the Chinese government, took over the bank, they didn't like it and said, "What is this? This is a lion, look like a cartoon, and it does look like a cartoon." So they refused to accept it, and they threw it away. In fact, it was these two pair of lions. They were given away to the University of Hong Kong, and today, they're standing guard at one of the senior university quarters, High West, I think. Stacey, is that right? Eh? Yeah, I think it's highway. They got moved around, okay. So nobody wanted it because it looked too goofy. And so, so the mainland Chinese government threw it away and said, no, we want a more traditional looking lion. So, and now today, it's replaced with this, Okay, and now they probably say, now that's a lion, not this one, And if you go to the corner of this building facing the HSBC Tower, no, I mean the Bank of China Tower, the new one, there are still two of these original lions around, and that they couldn't get that removed because, that two lion at the corner, the butt, is stuck to the wall, so it's part of the wall, so they can't get rid of it. And so this is the change of Art Deco in a simplified way. From around 1925, to 1937, I don't know why 1937. That's a magic year, and you see a very abrupt change, of the Art Deco style. And before 1937, you see the form of Art Deco building. There's a lot of lines, so vertical lines especially, and then balanced by horizontal lines. And there's always in a stack, kind of like a cigarette form, and there's always a central tower and right in the middle. And then after 1937, you see that, wow, suddenly it become very clean and things become very smooth, rounded, especially at the corner, and so become, could say, streamlined, and this become very modern looking, and this is probably the first successful attempt of making architecture looking modern and befitting the modern world in the 20th century, and you see, okay, these are examples of what I call the earlier version of the Art Deco architecture, and both are markets, one in Macau, another in Montreal in Canada, and you see the similarity. Yeah. So they both have the same central tower. It's more decorative than functional, and the main part of the building, so emphasis on the horizontal line, and with some element on the vertical. So it's more like a vertical element balanced with a horizontal element, and you can see the stepping, okay, and as well as here. So it's very typical. But by 1937 and onwards, you see a sudden change in the Art Deco form. So it become rounded, and they like to emphasize on the corner if they have a corner, if the site has a corner, and things become what you would say what's referred to as being streamlined, and the top is a familiar one-chai market, and the bottom is a Greyhound bus depot in Minneapolis. So you see the similarity. So no more that kind of decoration. That means all form of decoration has been wiped out from the surface of the building. So, and looking very, very modern indeed. And that the late version of the Art Deco building, and this is what I want to focus on, is known as Streamline Moderne. And this is a particular style. It's a late variation of the Art Deco style. And Streamline Moderne is the style that's often confused with in Hong Kong. with what is known locally as the Bauhaus architecture. Okay, and let's talk a little bit about streamline modern, where it comes from. And what is streamline modern? Okay, and I adapted this from Wikipedia, good old Wikipedia. And even though in university we always tell a student never, like make reference from Wikipedia. But anyway, streamline modern in the US is known as art modern. Well, the American they always want to have their own terms. Everything want to, even though it's they got it from someone else. So they want to make it their own, special. And so it's a later development of the Art Deco style of architecture, and it emphasizes on curving form, long horizontal lines, and quite often nautical elements. So such as mast, railing, porthole windows. Like here, railing, porthole window. The kind of this funnel and whatnot. Of ships. And so it seems to have reached its height around 1937, when many buildings in this style were completed worldwide. And so what it means is that streamline modern is a form of architecture that tries very hard to look like a ship, as in this building. Okay, and this is a maritime museum. And you might say, well, it's a maritime museum. Of course, the architect want to make it look like a ship. No, because this building completed in 1937 was originally designed as a public bathhouse. It's only recently that it's converted into a museum. Okay, it doesn't look like a ship. It's exactly like a ship. So architects try to be shipbuilders. So why is that so? And that's because earlier I talked about the machine age and how mechanical technology became applied into transportation design, vehicle design, and sea, air, and land became mature in the close to the middle of the 20th century, especially at the end of the 20th and the 1930s. And that has a tremendous impact for the entire design field, not only architecture but other design field as well. So let me give you an example. For example, at the beginning of the 20th century, okay, and we from the 19th century and before and up to the very early 20th century, ships look like this. So sailing ship. This is a German cargo ship. This is probably the last ship that's built with sails. And launched 1902, sail powered. So with a good wind in the right direction, you can cruise at about 20 kilometers per hour. But within about 10 years, you get the Titanic. Oh, you can see the leapfrog, in the technology advances, steam turbine. So you can cruise, regardless of the wind direction and the wind strength steadily at 40 kilometers per hour. And then another 10 years or so later, you get airships, and it was at that time quite common in Europe. And this is the Graf Zeppelin, okay, one of the biggest. So you can cruise at over 100 kilometers per hour. And then another 10 years, you have planes, that can cruise steadily at over 200 kilometers per hour from, I'm talking about long distance plane. And so in this case, it shows a China Clipper, one of the first, one of the earliest civil aviation service, that take people from North America to Hong Kong, places like Hong Kong. And this drawing shows one of these planes, seaplane, landing in Victoria Harbour in Hong Kong. And then shortly after the war, another 10 years, 20 years actually, another 10 years during the 40s, and then jet plane start to become common, and then after the Second World War, we have the world's first jetliner. So you can see, within a span of just 50 years, the kind of technological advances, and in the form of mechanical machines, and in the world. And that led to a lot of changes in society and the way we live, lifestyle. So if you look at so with these advances in mechanical technology, that means people are able to produce machines that can take people further and within shorter time. And and it coincided at the time when in the West, the rise of the middle class. So, and having a middle class means that there's a group of people with spending power and have more free time. So that means, that is the first time in the world you can see a significant number of people who are able to travel, and which is why you look at the earliest tourist travel posters, they all date back to the 1930s. And so with the rise of the middle class coinciding with the maturity of transportation of machine, of mechanical engineering technology and applied to transportation vehicles, and suddenly you have the world's, the beginning of the mass tourism. And so all of these posters you see here, date back to the 1930s, this is tourist posters. And you can see the same phenomena. Some of you don't look very convinced, but you can see exactly the same phenomenon happen in China. And China, after the Cultural Revolution, and when the Deng Xiaoping government, Deng Xiaoping announced that in 1979 that it's the national policy to have China economically open up to the world, and China started with no middle class. So everybody is classless, and then slowly because of the economic liberalization, and people start to acquire wealth. People are allowed, to make money, and to keep their own money and so on. Well, that was not allowed, before 1979, and over a period of 2 decades, starting from the 1990s. You see that China beginning to develop a middle class. And what do middle class people do in the case of China? They want to travel. So now they all come to Hong Kong, right? And so they also go elsewhere, And so you see, the same phenomena happened exactly in China as was in the West, back in the 30s, And China in the 1990s, that was when the tourism industry started to develop. And now, the tourism industry in China, whether it's domestic travel, domestic tourism or international tourism, is big money. Okay, so that's why, you see that, this transportation vehicle, and because of functional need, it has a certain design, which I'm going to talk about, and the design is so intrinsically appealing that it impacts on a lot of other fields of design. So whether it's industry or architecture and so on, even in art too. And which is why this book refer to the 1930s as a streamlined decade. This is a decade where everything was streamlined. And okay, what's streamlined? Okay, and just to give you an example, for example, this is a 1925 vehicle. It looks like a typical vehicle designed by engineer. Okay, so if you give an engineer, I hope there's no engineer here, and if you keep an engineer specification and say, okay, look, I want a car, that's able to go at this speed, and at this to this range, and with a certain amount of fuel, so engineer will come up with this vehicle. And you give it to a designer with a better aesthetic flair, and he would come up with something more like this. Okay, it's basically the same car, the same kind of conform to the same performance specification, but it's something different. It has a fairing, a shell, that's streamlined, and that is not only beautiful to look at, but at the same time, it does something functional that is enable to the car to go a little bit faster and a little bit further, because the streamlining has lessened the air resistance to the vehicle at high speed, and therefore make it more fuel economical. So this is what later adopted by architects and referred to as a functional aesthetics. This aesthetic is not only there for looks, but it serves a purpose as well. And so this is in the 30s. You see, with the increasing prevalence of transportation vehicle that led to the mass tourism industry. You see planes, car, trains, and all start to looking very streamlined and out of functional needs. But over time, the appeal of streamlining start to influence on on things, that doesn't need the kind of streamlining to perform. For example, this bread wagon, carry bread. I mean, how fast can it go? How come? I mean, it doesn't need to be streamlined, in such a way as if it can fly, Okay, and the Beatles, Beatles, the people's wagon, people's car, and the way it looks, what we refer to as the Beetle, and it's because of it happened. It was designed during a time when streamlining, streamlining was a popular trend in design. So all this streamlining becomes so appealing, that other fields of designer from other fields start to adopt it as well, and apply it in things that should be supposed to remain static. Okay, I mean, something that's static, you don't need to streamline it. Streamlining is functionally supposed for something that's moving very fast. Right? So, and therefore in the 30s, you start having radio, clocks, cameras, vacuum cleaners, and even a pencil sharpener that only works, that serve its purpose if it remain solidly stationary and start to look as if they can fly. This pencil sharpener look like a rocket ship. So that means streamlining has become transformed from something that's functional to something that's purely aesthetic. And because streamlining alone doesn't give you the kind of classical decorative character, with depicting something in life, but really it's based on something that's seemingly functional. So it has a kind of modern quality to it. So this is the kind of modern aesthetic, that the architect tried to adopt. And so they apply it to architecture for architects, which is ironic, because a building has to be 100%, if not 500% stationary, in order to function. If a building start to move, then we're all in trouble. But all these buildings are designed in such a streamlined manner. It looks like shapes. They're all pretending to be something that can move. You can really see, the style at the time, and then where are the influence, and and the influence come from transportation. And remember earlier I said that starting from the late 20s through the 1930s, and that was the beginning of mass tourism, because you see all these transportation vehicles are invented, and able to take people further away within a shorter time, and so that created new types of architecture. Okay, for example, like all these long distance bus station, the Greyhound bus station. There's no similar precedent before, and where do you take inspiration from to design something that's brand new? And every once in a while you get this suddenly they emerge a new form of architectural typology, building type. So for example, the current one is the spaceport, now I think under construction in New Mexico for Virgin Galactica. That would be the world's first civil space terminal, to take people, on space tourism. So you can see, this is something happening like the way it happened back in the 1930s. And so where did architects draw the inspiration from to design a building that has no direct precedent? So they took inspiration from the transportation vehicle this building is supposed to serve. So look at this 1930s Greyhound bus, and you look at the building, they look almost the same. So you can really, you look at me like, really, is this a coincidence? No, that if you read the books, and go back to the document, most of the architects, they actually drew inspiration from the transportation vehicle. So another example is this. This is one of the world's first civil aviation terminal building. This one is in Singapore, 1937, and when it was constructed, and it was one of the most advanced building of its kind in the world. And this is on record. Okay, it's in the archives, and that the public works department engineers, a British engineer, when asked, where did you get your inspiration from? Say from the airplane. Say this building here, is supposed to capture the spirit of flying, and by depicting the wings, of airplanes. Well, the architect says so himself. Okay, and still not convinced. And then another 1937 building. Look at this Coca-Cola bottling plant. Okay, it's a bottling plant, it's a factory. It's supposed to stay put, okay, not moving. And if you look closer, guess what it resembles? It's a ship. It's exactly a ship. So it's a style at the time, So architect designers they start to draw inspiration from something that is the most impressive during its day. And ocean liners, they're very, very impressive during its day. Just like today, I remember in the just like in the 60s, and the rockets were the most impressive thing on Earth. There was a time when the space race, and then the American finally won and took people to the moon. And then the 80s, space shuttle, become an iconic element, that influenced a lot of designs. And but at the time, that ship was dominant, and the theme of the ship keep coming back in a recurring way, in modern architecture. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later. Okay, so if you go to other places like Singapore, for example, as well as many other places, and the 30s building, especially the late 30s building, and you see that they look like ships because they're inspired by ships. Okay, look at this. It's a ship. Now look at this. This is in Liverpool. It looks like a tugboat. Look at Wan Chai Market. Does it look like a ship? I say no. Well, look again. See? It's a ship. And this Art Deco, streamline modern, I should say, late Art Deco, streamline modern market in the capital city of Cambodia, in Phnom Penh, and look like 4 ships crashed together. Yeah. And then interestingly, you see, in between styles, transitional styles. So from classical architecture before 1925, and jumps, because of the 1925 Paris Exposition to Art Deco trend. But styles, architectural style, they don't switch from one to the other, overnight. Usually it takes a span of several years or maybe even a decade, in order for the whole trend to transform from one to the other. So in between, during the transition period, you get a lot of a transitional building designed to a transitional style. And that means they incorporate, the older style and the newer style. So, and especially those built in the late 20s and early 30s. So in Singapore, so for example, and this shop house, and overall it looks rather classical. But if you look carefully, at the elements, you look at the capital, it's a pure circle. I mean, this doesn't appear in classical architecture. And also you see, some of the elements here, they're all simplified, just like Art Deco. In Hong Kong, we have Loi Sang Chun, and Loi Sang Chun on website, even the government website, is referred to as a neoclassical building. No, neoclassical architecture is something else. It's not even quite classical, because if you look at the detail, the elements, they're all simplified in a geometrical form. And that means that this is obviously they're heavily influenced by the emerging at the time the emerging Art Deco trend. And this building was built, in 1931. So right during the transition period. So what is Art Deco then, especially streamline modern, and what are the character defining elements, key elements? So, and even though Art Deco was probably one of the first global attempt to try to break away from the influence of classicism, but it hasn't managed to do so. It didn't manage to do so 100% successfully, and so you can still see some of the influence of classicism still clinging on. For example, the symmetry. So the left and the right look exactly the same. And this is a important feature in classical architecture, and it's carried on into Art Deco as well, including the late variation streamline modern. Okay, and for the late Art Deco buildings, and the streamline modern thing, the rounded corner is a feature. Okay, so and you see that it become almost a trend from the 30s to the 40s. And another thing, in the art, some of the more flamboyant Art Deco buildings, and whether streamlined or not, but mostly streamlined. As this fin here, right in the middle, you see it, especially in cinemas. They were built mostly in Art Deco film cinema, built in the 30s. This one used to be a cinema, but bought by McDonald in New Zealand. So it's this fin. What is this fin? It's decorative. Okay. It serves no purpose. You see, this is actually trying to depict. Giveaway. This is the engine hood of automobiles and trains. So it's supposed to depict this. Okay, so that's why you have this. Yeah. And which is why and this answer my the question that I posed as the title of this lecture. And Ultraman. Ultraman is an Art Deco design. It's a streamlined modern design. and this is not my speculation. If you read the biography of the designer Subaraya, right? LG Subaraya, he was trained as a designer during the Art Deco period. So after the war, he applied his training, into practice, and so he came up with this Ultraman character. That's totally Art Deco, very streamlined, modern. Everything you have, including the fin, I mean the streamlined eyes, the streamlined feature. So that you have in. Okay, another characteristic of the Art Deco architecture, whether it's streamlined or not, is the so-called flagpole, always in the middle. This is decorative than functional, and because a lot of these so-called flagpoles cannot be used as to carry flags, because it's not there's no access to it. I mean, in order to raise a flag, for example, in this shop house in Penang, you have to find a way to climb to the roof, and they might risk your life. So another example is these two buildings, one in Hong Kong, Nathan Road, and then another in Shanghai. Okay, so they are not designed as flagpoles, but more decorative. And yeah, in Hong Kong, Kowloon Cricket Club. Never seen a flag hoist on this pole. And then Maryknoll Convent. You're from Maryknoll Convent, right? So you're familiar with this. So look carefully. So there's a flagpole. And you see almost all of these, a lot of these 1930s shop houses, they have this flagpole in the middle. They're all decorative. And combined with the square windows and the color, it kind of remind me of Teletubbies. No, I'm sure it's not influenced by Teletubbies. This is just a coincidence. So what are they? I mean, again, it's a reference to nautical elements of ships. So again, it shows that over and over again, all these examples shows that in the 1930s, it's a trend, it's a fashion for architects to try to design buildings that look like ships. So this, all the flagpole is supposed to depict to a reference, to the mast, of ships. And unfortunately, in Hong Kong, like Lei Sang Chun, this is the transitional style building. That means a building that combines the classical style and the Art Deco style. And in fact, I suspect there are a lot more buildings, that of this period that carry the so-called flagpole. But unfortunately, during the time, these flagpole are made of the earlier version of the concrete technique. So, and they're not the coverage, of the cement and the density is not good enough to keep water out. So as a result, a lot of these flagpoles, the steel reinforcement is being corroded because of water penetration, and after a while, it's so badly corroded that come a serious typhoon, they all get blown away. So then you don't see the flagpole anymore. Okay, now finally we get into the modern architecture. For modern, you can say that it's an earlier attempt just before the truly modern form of architecture. So you can refer to the streamlined modern architecture as a proto-modern architecture, and that streamlined modern ruled the world, from the 30s through the 40s to the 50s, and it's only after the Second World War that modern architecture, the real modern architecture, begin to replace, streamlined modern to become, the dominant architectural style, well, modernists, they don't like to use the word style, they call it a tradition. Okay, so the modern tradition become the dominant form of aesthetic form and it still applies to this day. And what is modern architecture or modernism in architecture? So spelled with a capital M, and this is based on the principle of functionalism. So that means whatever you put on a building, you design something, it has to serve a functional purpose, a practical purpose. It cannot be there, for only for decorative reason. And and the aesthetic, just like the streamlined car, and it's derived from function and not decoration. So the streamlining of a car, sports car, it look very nice, but it's there for a practical reason. And the principle, is summarized in the modern architect's maxim. This is the famous quote, form follow function. So whatever thing, the form you design has to follow a particular function. So, but unfortunately, the resultant architecture often has a utilitarian appearance, and it's not quite easily appreciated or understood by people other than architects. Architect can describe something beautifully, using the architect speak. But then for just ordinary people, they look at it and say, it's a box. Okay. And that's what happened. You see, they're all boxes. It's a glass box. It's a concrete box. And so, despite what the architects love to say. And what's in the name? And this is something that's quite confusing to non-architects. And modern architecture, modern spelled with the capital M, and this is the proper name used by architects. And sometimes in books, that are used, mainly written for non-architects, and you tend to use the term modernist architecture is used. Okay, and because I think it's quite confusing to describe modern architecture without realizing that you're referring to modern with a capital M. So you use modernist, but in school as an architect, trained as an architect, we never use the word modernist. And in America, well, typically Americans like to make things, even though they adopted it as their own, so to say that, okay, this is ours, nobody, it doesn't belong to anybody else. So they call it the international style, so just to make it different. And so they start to call modern architecture then, starting in 1932 out of an exhibition, but there's another story. In Hong Kong, interestingly, we tend to call it by our own special name. We call it Bauhaus style or Bauhaus architecture, and referring specifically to the early modern architecture with capital M from the 1930s to the 1960s. So you can see, 1930s, modernism overlaps with Art Deco, especially streamlined Moderne, and sometimes they cross-influence each other, and which is why in Hong Kong, some of the streamlined modern buildings are confused as Bauhaus architecture. And such as Wan Chai Market. Wan Chai Market is not a Bauhaus building or modern building, but you can call it Bauhaus. Hong Kong people like to call it Bauhaus building, doesn't matter. And because one way to distinguish is that you look at the Wan Chai Market, it's symmetrical. Okay, that is a very strong sign, a feature of the streamlined modern or the late Art Deco, whereas modern architecture, so there's no symmetry. I'll talk about it later. And Bauhaus itself is not a style, and properly Bauhaus building refer to those designed by architects with direct association or influence by the pre-World War II Bauhaus school of design. Someone wrote on the internet and say, well, WTF, let's just call them Bauhaus architecture. So it doesn't really matter as long as you know what it is, okay? In the world, where can you find authentic Bauhaus architecture? In Israel, the old historical core of Tel Aviv, the capital of Israel, and called the White City. And this has been inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2003. And why? Because this is the largest collection or concentration of Bauhaus building, about 4,000 of them in the world. And these were built in the 1930s to the 1950s by German Jewish architects trained directly from the Bauhaus School of Design, who escaped Nazi Germany and to the pre-state Israel. And so they are the one who built this White City, the original, the modern historical core of Israel. capital of Israel. So you can see these are the buildings found in the so-called White City. Okay, they belong to the truly Bauhaus tradition. So there's no symmetry, and everything is functional and looking very clean. You know. And okay, this is what it looks like. You know. And interestingly, in Hong Kong, we do have a mini White City. And one time, you know, we were our class, you know, we held a field trip to this mini White City in Hong Kong. And Israeli architect happened to be visiting, so she asked to come along. And then when we took her there, she exclaimed, "Oh, this looks exactly like back home, you know, in Israel's White City," and that is in Kaduri Hill. If you have a chance, you know, go to Mongkok and go up to Kaduri Hill, Gao Do Lei San, you see a good collection of buildings built almost the same time as those buildings found in the White City. From the 30s to the 50s and 60s, you know, and they look very almost the same, you know, as building that you will find in Israel, in the White City of Israel. Well, that's another story, and I can talk about it another hour into it. Okay, so modernism, modern architecture. That's the first time that architects are able to completely break free from classicism, and as well as other areas of design, you know, and art, you know. So take for example art, you know. Okay, how did it completely break free from classicism? So in the Art Deco, you know, it tried to become more abstract, you know, less formal, you know, telling personal story instead of epic story, you know. And for modernism, it take a slightly different approach, you know. So this is a classical painting. It's representational, single point perspective, capturing a moment of time. So the angle that modernists, so in this case for artists, you know, try to break free from classicism is using the idea of the time and space. Okay, so you're looking at a one-point perspective like a photograph, you know. So all the lines converge into a single point in the distance, you know, okay, the perspective, and capturing one moment in time. If you look at the middle of the painting, and you see these two characters here, so you have no idea whether the soldier is pushing the woman into the water or trying to pull her back from falling into the water. So because it only captured that moment, so it's about time and space, and so that become the basis of this breaking free from classicism. And where's the influence? And the early 20th century is a time of major scientific discovery besides technological advances. You know, you have Einstein's general theory of relativity, you know, and among other things, you know. So there's a lot of discovery, mostly made by the Germans. Unfortunately, fortunately for us, you know, they all ran away, you know, and then to other places in the world, you know. So they didn't serve the Nazi Germany like Einstein and went to the States because he was Jewish. And Einstein's theory of relativity is particularly influential to designer, not only to architect, but not only to artists, but also architects. So his idea of time space, and so in art, and one way to break free from classicism is to make it so abstract that it become just colors, you know, and geometry. So for example, Moderne's painting on the upper left, you know, or I don't know what whose painting is that. This is a Miro, I think, right? So just colors, you know, and shapes, you know. So and Kandinsky, you know, just colors and shapes and compositions, you know. And Picasso, and it's probably one of the earliest artists to try to use the idea of time and space, you know, to break free from classical way of painting. So he invented this thing called, I think, Cubism, and you look at this and it looks very strange, you know, a woman with distorted feature. So what he's trying to do is that for painter, Cubist painter, is that to break free from the single point perspective and also capturing one moment of time. So what they're doing is that if you cover up different parts of the face, you will start to realize that what the artist is trying to do is to combine the view of, in this case, a woman from different perspective points. So you get a multiple perspective in looking at multiple perspective at one time. So I mean, this is a constraint of a two-dimensional medium. So in so doing, It's also there's an implication, that means implying that you're moving through time, because in order to look at different dimensions, you have to move through space and then involve time. So that means, you're breaking free from the constraint of time as well. So, I mean, at least that's the idea, okay? I think it's almost not possible, to do it on a 2D medium. So this is another famous cubist and futurist, painting, and the title is a Nude Descending Staircase. So in a classical painting approach, you will have a realistic painting of a naked woman, at one point of walking down a staircase, and that's it. But in this case, and because you want to depict time and space, so it's showing movement. So of what are the lines, that give you the impression of movement, of abstract movement of something going down a sloping plane, a stair. So it's trying to capture the movement instead of the person in the process of going down steps. So you're seeing, what you're seeing here is that the movement from here to here, and this involves time, moving across space. So again, this is the notion of incorporating time and space, into painting. So same thing for that. What I originally thought is a cyclist, but it turned out to be a knife, someone grinding a knife. Okay. So how does that apply to architecture? So Mona Lisa, classical painting. So very still, capturing one moment in time, single point perspective, translate into architecture. So you want to force the viewer of this building that there will be no surprise, and people can predict exactly what they're going to see by having an approach head on, and so that people will see the facade. That's why the facade, the elevation of the classical painting buildings are very important. Essentially, you just have to design the facade. Yeah. And this Villa Rotunda, I think, in Italy, is considered by many as the most perfect classical piece of architecture, because the four sides of the building are exactly the same, so that when you look at it head on, you can predict what the other sides are like. So it's a very static form of depiction. So no time, no space. So everything just frozen at one moment, one point, and one moment in time. And for the cubist, involving time and space, so you see, you're forcing you to look at one painting with different perspective point. So, and in architecture, it's the same thing. So instead of something that's very symmetrical, so it's predictable, so it becomes less predictable by having non-symmetry, and things are designed in such a way that's layering, so it's more three-dimensional. So, and the approach is seldom head-on. Usually it has to be like an indirect route that forces you to go around the building, so that it forces you to look at the building from different viewpoint as you go through space. And because of the layering and the non-symmetrical arrangement, and as every angle the building looks slightly different, and so it becomes very not predictable. Is the mic working? No. Okay. So it becomes not predictable. So that's the way the architect's attempt of incorporating time and space into the design. So by that, finally, architecture is able to break free from the classical influence. So modern architecture, Bauhaus. Okay, what is Bauhaus? Hong Kong, everybody talk about Bauhaus, and nobody talk about modern architecture. So, and Bauhaus, it really refers to from German, I can't even pronounce it. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it. It means house of architecture or the school of architecture. It was the name of a school of architecture and applied arts in Germany, and was established using the fundamental of modernism in design. It's based on functional aesthetics and mass production. And today, the curriculum of all schools of architecture in the world is based on the Bauhaus school. So that's why it's so influential. So everything that all architects are essentially trained in the Bauhaus tradition, you might argue. And this is what the school looked like. It still survives today. And today, it's a World Heritage Site. This is the most famous of the three schools. And it moved around a little bit. This is the last school, I believe. No, the second one was built in 1925 by the first director of the school. There are three directors, and by Walter Gropius. And So when the Nazi came to power, and he closed down the school, and all the director and the student, had to run away, and essentially sent on exile, to other places, And why? Because, and the Nazi Germany, the Nazism, they are anti-communism. That means include socialism, and the Bauhaus system, the political basis is based on socialism, and every architectural movement is anchored onto a number of things, and one of which is the apolitical ideology. And classicism has come to symbolize, the political ideology of monarchism, so 官代主义, okay, of the imperial rule, And whereas, this Bauhaus, or rather the modernism architecture, it tried to incorporate what was at the time, the most advanced thinking in political ideology, and one of which was socialism, which came out of communism. It was a very new idea in the early 20th century. And of course, the Nazi didn't like that, and so the school has to close down. Because you look at the Bauhaus way of teaching, you talk about mass production. That means designing for the masses based on mass production. That means you are supposed to be able to design architecture in a cheap way, and you can produce it in quantity so that you can supply, building cheaply to the masses, especially to workers. So that means architecture is no longer like classical time; it's reserved for the elite. So it's trying to change, the whole socio-political way of looking at architecture. So again, this is even better, So from ideological point of view, how it deviates and from a classical influence, and become truly modern, and not just simply on the more superficial aesthetic way. And and because its ideology is based on fairness, equity to society, socialism, and its functional aesthetics, and that means it can be designed cheaper, and it can be mass produced, and it become very suitable for the massive rebuilding of war-damaged city, especially in Europe after the Second World War, and that's why modernism started to become important, and only after the Second World War. And this is what happened, you see, in a lot of West cities in Europe after the Second World War. I mean, they're in ruins, and you really need to repair, and rebuild the city in a hurry. But they ran out of money, so and suddenly people look around. Hey, modernism, perfect. It's designed for mass production. With one set of plans, we can duplicate 100, 1,000. So the more we build, by the economy of scale, and we can build it even cheaper. And that somebody soon. People realized that would be the perfect solution to mass housing in public housing, and that was adopted wholesale, in places like Singapore and Hong Kong, where the public housing program are some of the biggest and most successful in the world. So you see cities, in Europe as well as in Asia, start to look like this. So buildings that look very similar, just churn out, and it's an ideal solution for its time, when you need to rebuild a massively destroyed place, in a hurry, and with not much money. But in places in Asia, like Singapore and Hong Kong, even though it didn't suffer as much physical damage as in the cities in Europe, but it was cities like Hong Kong, for example, it was impacted by the shift in the economy. So in the modern economy, so the shop houses that once upon a time was the most dominant form of architecture in Hong Kong became obsolete to the modern way of doing business, and especially for economic development. And so they had to be replaced, and also because of a lot of other circumstances, like the influx of refugees from mainland China, from communist China. And so that led to the need for housing, as well as offices, that can be produced very cheaply and very quickly in vast quantities. And so the Bauhaus, way of design, and producing architecture became was suitable, and so it was adopted. You can see Hong Kong's first the early public housing estate. This is practically a Bauhaus architect's dream. Yeah, and then later, I mean, you heard in the second lecture of this series last Saturday, it was also applied to private housing as well. Okay, modern architecture, functionalism, form follows function. Okay, what does it mean? Okay, from the form follow function approach to design was popular from the 50s to the 60s. I mean earlier before, but earlier it was knocked on. In the 30s, 40s, everything stopped because of the Second World War. But the 30s, if you remember earlier, it was dominated by the Art Deco style, and especially the streamlined modern. So where even radio, your vacuum cleaner, your pencil sharpener all look like spaceships, okay, all streamlined. But after the Second World War, form follow function, the Bauhaus or modern way of designing become popular. So everything you see, and serve a purpose. Like the curve here of this bottle is not designed for looks anymore. It really is designed so they can grip it properly. So the Coca-Cola bottle, and you can see, like everyday products as well as architecture, start to take on this approach in design. For example, this camera here could very well, have taken on the more classical approach of design, having a perfect symmetry by simply moving this sign, which can be anywhere, on the camera right to here, so that it balances symmetrically with this shutter button. But it didn't, because it's a modern approach, so we have to move it to break the symmetry. And you see the attempt, the way, the architects carry out, this modern approach in designing, so that the whole thing look very purposeful, functional, and not decorative, and therefore not symmetrical, because symmetrical become artificial. So you look at homes too, so everything come like, even the furniture, they're not exactly the same, different chairs. So you look at all this design, this is a very functional, typical form follow function looking Sony radio. This is a 1965 model, TFM 110, I think. Yeah, only a nerd can remember that. And so everything, all the features are in a certain place for a certain purpose, so it is not there just for decorative reasons. So even a car, which somehow becomes symmetrical, by default, and but still, you're looking at this 60s design, they're all very purposeful design. None of these, the 30s, 40s, even the 50s, cars in the States, we have great fins, remember those Art Deco cars the American love, so those are purely decorative. But look at these German cars, very functional. Okay, and then applying to architecture, you see the same thing. This is Walter Gropius, the first director of the Bauhaus School of Design, and he didn't design very many buildings, because he later went to the States and became a professor. He was, I think, the dean or the chair of architecture at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. So he was influential in influencing students who later become architects, and rather than being influential as a practicing architect. But he did design this building, and this became the prototype of all Bauhaus architecture to come. Okay, and but more influential is this architect. He was born Swiss, the French-speaking part of Switzerland, and later he was naturalized as a French citizen. That's where the French connection comes in, right? Another French connection. So Le Corbusier, and he was tremendously influential. In fact, if you have to name one modern architect, and that as an example of the modern movement, he will be in. He's top of the list. Even though he's not part of he has no direct connection with the Bauhaus School of Design, but he's affiliated. I mean, he did interact, with the professors, the famous architects from the Bauhaus School of Design. And I mean, he's so famous that there's stamps, even money, banknotes, depicting his face, So, and he's so famous that he even become a fashion icon. But that come later. Before that, I can say that now, currently there's an attempt, to put together, buildings that Corbusier's designed, and as a joint submission, what they call a joint submission, okay, of as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So these are from, I think, mainly France, but different parts of France, okay. And Japan is doing the same thing, because Japan has a number of several Corbusier building. They call it a serial submission, okay, and but still pending. Okay. So this has been in place since 2006. Okay. But you can see, how important he is, and his work, I mean, has a potential to become a World Heritage Site collectively, all his buildings, And earlier I said that he's so influential that he became a fashion icon among architects and also architecture students. His glasses, he's been quoted as famously said that because our eyeball are round, and therefore it only makes sense to wear glasses with round frame, and form follows function. So, and so, today, if you Google architects' glasses, straight away you come up with this, okay. So this become the iconic architects' eyewear, and from the 60s, through until even the 90s, And see this guy, this is not him, okay. I mean, it's creepy, it's scary, it looks like him, This is Philip Johnson. He's a whole generation younger than Corbusier. And look at his glasses. In fact, I just read up today. I was curious about Philip Johnson's glasses. I said, how come it look exactly like Corbusier's glasses? In fact, he was he admired Corbusier so much that he had glasses specially made, to look exactly like a replica of Corbusier's glasses. And then you see, I'm Pei. And then you see Rocco Yim. Architect's glasses. Anyway, so, and he's influenced because he's able to give you the theoretical basis of how architecture can completely break free from classicism based on this 5 points of architecture. So, in essence, this is what we in Hong Kong Cantonese call ngok gao. Okay, so that means you subvert and the old tradition, you completely reverse it. So in classical architecture, and you have columns, the supporting elements in the form of wall, structural wall. If a building is built of brick or of stone, so you have big, massive columns, But because of the new availability of modern construction technique and material, reinforced concrete, and you can have tiny little points, so tiny little columns, So that means, you don't have the structure of a building, taking up a lot of space. Okay, so you can have a lot of space with just tiny little elements as supporting structure, and so that is the subversion of classical architecture. And so in classical architecture, for a house, for example, and a house has to be placed, within a space, right? And so if the space is a garden, so you have a house in the garden, on a piece of land. So that means, the footprint of the building would have taken up the garden space, So you deprive, the land of an area of the garden space. So Corbusier say that we don't have to. We can have your cake and eat it too, So you can have both, the garden with. You can have a building, on the land with no loss of the garden. How, By raising this building on tiny little support like this, and therefore this space become continuous, So you don't lose the continuity of the space. And better still, you put the garden back on the roof, So from the air, you see that the garden is all there, with the building, no loss of garden. So this is a second subversion. And you have the open plan because of the reinforced concrete construction. And therefore you have tiny little spots, pins, of columns in a space. And the wall is no longer structural. So that means you are free to arrange the partitioning of your space any way you like, unlike in the past, whereas the walls are the structure, and so the spaces are already defined, controlled by the structure. And now, you can do it any way you like, you can curve, it doesn't matter, you don't like it, you can knock it away, and you rebuild it elsewhere, as long as you don't touch the structure. And so there's the freedom of the plan. And then with the freedom of the plan, you also come the free facade, because, the wall, unlike classical architecture, is no longer part of the structure, and therefore you can window anywhere you want, and you can have a continuous window, and looking as if there's no break in between. I mean, that's not possible in classical architecture. And finally, the window, we call it the ribbon window, the long window, will give you a brighter interior as well as a better view to the outside. So that's not possible in classical architecture. So by this fine point, you completely subvert the whole classical tradition and enable, the creation of architecture from this, to this. Okay, I mean this is a 1929 building. Imagine 1929 when most houses look like this, and suddenly you have this, this practically looked like a spaceship at the time. And today it's a national monument. And this is a plan, and even designed to the way the cubists would want to incorporate in a painting in terms of time and space. So you see, this is a parking. How does the car park? So if you have been there, I was told, I've not been there, but my friend have been there, told me that you have to come from a roundabout approach. I think you have to circle around and go up to the hill. So as you go up, you keep seeing the building at different angle. You say, get closer and closer, and then you swing by the back, and then you have to drive through this driveway underneath, and then you come by here, and then you park your car here. Okay, like a spiral. It looks kind of dangerous, See how narrow this is, and see how long the cars are, I mean, look how tiny the column is, You smash into this, there goes your house, Anyway, architects, and we are never practical, okay? We pretend that we are very practical. So, anyway, that's the design. And Corbusier, and again, the idea of a machine influencing architecture comes back in modern or Bauhaus, architecture as well, And in his famous book, where's his book? I don't even want to pronounce the thing. This is a 1922 or 23 book, 23, and it was translated into English in 1927. It was mentioned in the last lecture. And he was famously quoted as saying, the house, which is the most basic form of architecture, is a machine for living in. And to illustrate this concept of a house as a machine for living in, so that means it's functional, practical, no frills, And he, in this book, he uses several photographs of a ship, but it's not the entire ship, but parts of a ship. Okay, he just focused on the cabin, okay, the livable area of the ship. Okay, whereas the Art Deco architecture, especially in the streamlined modern architecture, try to depict the whole ship. But in this case, Corbusier only one part of the ship, and therefore, his building, to illustrate this concept, is an abstraction of part of the ship. So this look like this part of the ship, see the funnel and part of the cabin, but not the entire ship. So it's a step even more abstract than the modern, streamlined modern way of being influenced by the ship. So again, you look at this. This is his experimental unité de habitation. And he built several of these. This is like a prototype public housing block, and it's part of a ship. It's an abstraction. And this was after the Second World War. Is adopted by many places in the world as the basis for public housing. This is the kind of high-rise, or well, not high-rise. This is a medium-rise today. It's considered medium-rise, and of more high-density approach in housing people. And he did several of these blocks, in Europe. And after the war, this is adopted, I would say, by many places, especially in Singapore and Hong Kong. So you look at Ngau Tau Kok, Lower Ngau Tau Kok Ha Chin, Lower Ngau Tau Kok Estate. This has been demolished, 60s building, and you compare with one of the unité de habitation thing, it looks almost identical, and that's not by coincidence, because architects who were trained in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even up to the 80s, were heavily influenced by Corbusier. Even today, as an architecture student, even today, in the 21st century, students still have to study, the projects, and the theory of Corbusier. And functionalist architecture, character defining elements. Okay, what are the key features? So, well, if you ask, what is the most Bauhaus of all Bauhaus building? Well, no further than the Bauhaus School of Design. Okay, this is the original Bauhaus building, the first example of its kind. And so this influence, what was to come. And in Hong Kong, the most representative Bauhaus building, would be the City Hall. You look at it, compare with this. So you have the high block, high block. It's actually called the high block. The low block, you have the low block. It's actually called the low block. And the kind of like a, linked by kind of like a way, you know, that breaks free from the rigid symmetry of classical architecture. Yep, you got it right here. You can see the influence. So this was completed in the 60s. So by architects probably who went to school in the 50s, you know, I mean, at the time, the 50s, the most, the architectural curriculum would be looking at the most avant-garde designs in the world, and this would include Corbusier's design. And even our former CGO in Central. So original design, you see that you get the high block, well, they're all kind of uniform, so this will automatically become the high block and then followed by the low blocks. Okay. And this is Corbusier's, the high-low block composition. Earlier was the feature, high-low block composition. Continuing on, so Corbusier was involved in the design of this building. This is the UN headquarters, United Nations headquarters in New York. So the high block and the low block composition. He's one of the architects involved, but I was told that the story was that he, essentially, there was his design. And you see that in many buildings in the 60s and 70s, you know, so the high block and low block very prominent. Yeah, this is wider here. And well, in Hong Kong, the high block, low block, exactly the same kind of approach. Okay, and you look at the details, and in the tropics and the subtropical area, and Corbusier, what happened is that he designed a number of buildings in Brazil, in South America during the war years, and a number of architects studied under him, Brazilian architects, and he influenced them a lot. And so they created a form of design feature that is conducive, you know, to the local climate. So what they call the sun shading feature, or the egg crate sun shading. You see that in a number of buildings, you know, built in the 60s and the early 70s. So Nose building in Hong Kong U. You know. So there's a very obviously, you know, one building, the sun shading, you know, the feature is influenced by Corbusier. And then the central government offices, the West Wing. So you see it, they're very similar kind of design. So this is the one in Brazil. I don't know whether it's directly designed by Corbusier or by his student, but this is the typical thing. And this is Nose building in Hong Kong U. Okay, and the sun shading and the raised ground floor. And remember Corbusier's, one of his ideas to subvert this classical architectural tradition is to raise a building so that you maintain the continuity of the space, so you get no loss of space, you know, with the building on the land. And you see that in Hong Kong, even though it's not quite, you know, because Hong Kong, you know, I mean, nobody would just simply leave the ground free, right? You want to put shops, you know. So at least, you know, there's an attempt here to try to look as if the whole thing has been raised, you know. But in Singapore, especially the early, well, not so early, from the earliest up to the 70s and 80s, public housing block in Singapore, they all have, all the blocks have this raised floor feature. And I interviewed some of the architects, you know, in the Singapore's housing development block, and they say that this is a Corbusier idea. We adopted it. And then this is again the egg crate sun shading fin, raised ground floor. Look at Hong Kong. So the central government offices, West Wing. And then, so functionalist architecture in Hong Kong. And these are other examples. So even though this is a smaller building, you can still see an attempt to combine the high block, low block, sun shading. You know, so you can see all the elements are there. You know. Like in this one, so this is a high block, and this is a low block, and the sun shading right there. So very typical. You know. I mean, once you get, you're aware of the feature, and you don't even have to look too carefully. You can start to identify that these are the kind of Bauhaus, quote-unquote Bauhaus architecture we are talking about. Okay. Again, non-symmetrical, and this is the attempt to put within one rectangular small building, you know, of a high block, and then the horizontal low block. This is Tung Chung Market. You see the same thing, you know. So this obviously would be the so-called high block portion, the high block, and then this will be the low block part. Okay. So these look almost identical. They're built around the same time. No, actually, it's almost 10 years apart, but it belongs to the same approach in design. Okay. And this building, what does it remind you of? Earlier I showed you some industrial design. The radio, remember the Japanese radio? Does it look like the radio to you? Yeah. Well, not convinced. Well, let's see. Let's flip the thing around. And we add an antenna. There you go. It's exactly a radio. And that's not coincidental because, both items, whether it's a building or radio, they follow the strict Bauhaus form follow design approach, and therefore, they come out almost looking the same. And that's also the reason why, the streamlined modern building, they all look like ships or airplanes, because, they follow the same approach in design. The streamlining the case. So you can start to see, the elements in the true Bauhaus architecture, and what we in Hong Kong refer to as Bauhaus architecture in Hong Kong. And the characteristics, the high block followed by the low block. So this is the high element combined with the low element. I mean, this building, if you want to follow the classical tradition, it's very easy to make it look symmetrical. But no, you have to distinguish this part from this part. Why? Because this is a staircase, and this is the library and office and whatnot space. So that form follow function. So people should be able to tell, by the form follow function approach from the outside that this is some other space and this is another kind of space. Yep. This is a little clip. How are we doing with time? Are we over? 15 minutes, okay. Okay, so let me show you a little clip, okay, of what am I doing? Okay, the house is a machine for living in, and okay, Le Corbusier's influence in Hong Kong's public housing. Okay, Corbusier, before the war, he has this idea about how to create more efficient use of land, and also creation of public space, which is again a novel idea. And before the Second World War, in Europe, a lot of places they are ruled by the monarchy. So that means there's no such thing as public space for the people. There's a socialist idea. And what you have as a public space is a square. It's actually belong to the king, and its royal family, and it's a place for you to come and worship the king, the emperor and whatnot, during a certain time of the year, and it doesn't belong to the people. It's not real public space. But Corbusier is trying to introduce this socialist idea of a public space, and by grouping people into within in a more compact and more high way, into a taller tower instead of spreading them all over the place, And he's able to build realize this concept in the actual architecture after the Second World War. So he built like 5 buildings separately, and some of them are World Heritage sites. And this is another example. And this became, after the war, the proto design for public housing in Asia, especially in Hong Kong and Singapore. You can see, how well Corbusier was able to build one single block, but in places like Singapore and Hong Kong, can build multiple blocks. So I'm fully realizing, the aspiration of the Bauhaus approach in producing architecture. And this was Corbusier's idea. And he said that in the past, when people live in houses, and there's no such thing as mass public high-rise housing, so a land, for 1 million people, you would be fully occupied, by houses, maybe a little bit of a garden, And where are the public space? The only public space are the roads. That's it. Okay, it's not real kind of a social space, And for Corbusier, in 1925, he came out with this. This was talked about, in last week's lecture. So I'm not going to detail. You see that? So if we are able to group all the people into high-rise and mid-rise building at the site, and then we will free up all this space, that you can become gardens, And these are the social space, And these are the real public space, And that it become realized in places like Singapore and Hong Kong, And in Hong Kong, we do it even better. We make it even denser, taller, So, look at this, it's exactly the same thing, but except that it's tighter, and even denser. And look at this, look at this. This is Corbusier's idea. And once we incorporate in places like Tai Kusing, this is not public housing, and this is a private housing. So it's exactly the same idea, but this is so much denser, so much taller. And of course, the public housing version is even more exaggerated than Corbusier's original idea back in 1925.
That is never happening, isn't it?
Huh?
The one, his vision in Paris.
No.
Never happened.
Never happened. Happened here in Hong Kong. So we realized Corbusier's dream. And then modernism, as it developed further, and there's another star architect that is important. And if you want to choose another architect to study to understand modern architecture or Bauhaus architecture, and it would be this guy, okay, who invented a way of designing is known as minimalism. So, and this is his most famous quote: "Less is more." Okay. Earlier, remember functionalism, form follow function. Okay, this is the standard Bauhaus approach in design. It looks like this, okay, for all the products. So, when you apply minimalism, so we want to go one step better than form follow function, functionalism. One step better, what will it be? It will be minimalism, less is more. This. Your iPhone, okay, is a classic minimalist design, a piece of minimalist design. And somebody told me, he said, yeah, it's only with advances in technology that you're able to achieve a true minimalism. Yeah, that's right, because with mechanical analog control, you can do easily form follow function, the functionalist approach. But you have a lot of knobs, and a button, dial everywhere, But you make it really clean and simple. You need digital advances, in technology, so that all the control interface can be hidden onto a screen and show up when you need it, and disappear when you don't need it. And so today, only in the 21st century, this become true. So look at all your. This looks like, I don't know whether it's a TV or oven, and it's oven, okay. Camera, the house, very clean, very simple, and yeah. I mean, things like with a snap of a finger, this thing will just. The drawer will come out, because, I think ordinarily you have to feel all the place to find the drawer. And this is the minimalist approach in design, and it's feasible with automatic digital control, but at least, in architecture was attempted as far back as like the 1930s, but it's slowly being realized after the Second World War in the United States in the 50s, 40s and 50s, and by this guy, Miss Van der Rohe. Well, I was told the German way of pronouncing his name is something else. It's Mies Van der Rohe, something like that. Yeah. Okay. Miss Van der Rohe. Okay. And he was the third and the last director of the Bauhaus School of Design. Well, so his design is truly Bauhaus because he was the director of the Bauhaus School of Design, and because of Nazi Germany, he has to escape. So he went to the United States in the late 30s. And became a very successful practicing architect. In fact, he was one of the earliest star architects, in the world. And this is one of his designs. Okay, this is the Crown Hall of Illinois Institute of Technology, a university building. So, how we describe it? It's a glass box. Okay, this is the best you can describe it. Very, very simple. Very, very minimalist. And this is his famous quote, "Less is more." And I think the best Chinese translation I've come across is "敢若見精華." And also, he's also famously quoted to have said, God is in the details, not devils in the detail. Okay, so that means, things so simple that you have to look very close to see, like, that is where God is. Wow, that is the, 精緻顯神通. You have to look very close to realize, where the essence, what's so great about this building is. And what he's trying to do is really try to manifest the Bauhaus way of incorporating mass production into architecture by having precision. Okay, so for example, what I'm saying is that in classical architecture, everything is handmade. So a table, you will need a carpenter to plane it, to sand it, and you take a lot of skills, to able to make the edge, perfectly straight. But even how good the skill is the carpenter. If the table is long enough and you put your eyes along the edge to look along the line, you find that it will be slightly off, because you cannot make something not possible, something that's perfectly straight. But with machine, mass production, everything is made prefabricated in the machine. You can achieve a perfectly straight line. Okay, no deviation. Especially today, you can use laser, to line it up first, before you have a machine, a computer control machine, to plane it and cut it. So everything is perfect. So to achieve that is only possible in the modern world, and so that is again another way of having architecture breaking free from the classical convention. So which is why you say that God is in the details. So if you understand the detail, then you realize what the true greatness of this design. And so another design, again, it's another glass box. It looks almost the same as the one previously. All his buildings look like that. Okay, so and his two most famous buildings are this is the Barcelona Pavilion, again in one of the expositions, 1929. But after the expo, the pavilion, it was demolished. And then because he's such a master, and then Spain later excavated the ground and found the foundations, and then they have it reconstructed based on the original drawings, and today it's a national monument. And it's a prototype house of what a minimal house would look like if this was built. This was back in the late 1920s. So very simple. And but the furniture, the chair here today become a modern classic. You look at a lot of architects' office, they have not the real thing, but the copy back in Shenzhen of this chair. Another one is Farnsworth House, built for a woman doctor, a kidney specialist, Farnsworth, Dr. Farnsworth. And today is a national monument. Okay, this is a national historic landmark, and very simple. Okay, and even the furniture inside is laid out in a way it expresses his ideal of being minimal. And this building, the architecture, actually the story behind the architecture is even more interesting. The relationship between the architect and the client became an interesting story. I think there was a book and a play written about it, so you can look it up in the internet. Okay, Miss Vanderohe and Dr. Farnsworth. And but eventually they sue each other in court. I mean, it was implied that they had a relationship, but they end up suing each other because the architect realized that he has created such a masterpiece. According to what I read, is that even during his construction, architects and architecture students came to the site to look at it because wow, this is something that's earth-shaking, revolutionary, the most advanced expression of an architectural idea. And they worship Miss Vanderohe. It's a star. Of architecture, and so Miss Vanderohe soon realized that wow, I'm creating something, a historic landmark, and so he started to want to control everything, about the house to make it perfect, to the way he wanted it to be. And he even, according to what I read, is that he even wrote a schedule of what things can be done, how it can be done, for the client, So of course it's too much, right? For example, you have to get up in the morning at what time, you have to open the shade in a certain way, you have to, do this and that, After a while, Dr. Farnsworth say this is crazy, True, all true story. And so, he applies his minimalist, in a big way, much bigger way in the commercial building. For example, Seagram building, and this is one of the first of its kind, of a simple glass box. And during the time, all the commercial building around will look like this. He has this setback so that people have a chance to look at the magnificence of this building. Okay, it's purposely set back with a plaza. It's a way to also show off, the wealth of this building. You say, I can afford to throw away this space for the public. True. And also his apartment blocks. And today, because of the mass production that we have, and you look at the site today, construction site, there are very few actual in situ, that means on-site construction work going on. A construction site today, most of the work are basically assembly. Okay, that means component made from factories transported to the site and assembled together. And so, therefore, because of the way construction is carried out today, all these buildings are very easily copied. And so today you see the Miss Vanderohe minimalist architecture everywhere in Hong Kong. I can see one right here, okay? There's another one right over here. There's another one over here, okay? And there's a couple behind. And so there's another one also over here. And then this is Corbusier's idea, not Corbusier, Groupier's idea. So you see, I mean, like the kind of influence that modernism has in Hong Kong, and from Central Market. Central Market is not a true, a pure Bauhaus piece of architecture because it has a slightly rounded corner, so it still shows signs of the influence from the Art Deco, modern, streamline modern, and so because it's during the transition period, so therefore you get a mixture of both style. So and then this is an example I've shown you before. So this is iconic modern architecture or Bauhaus architecture, as Hong Kong people call it. Okay, this is a very good example, very Bauhaus. Okay, look at this. This is a statue square. You might not realize that this is a very modern or Bauhaus form of architecture, but you look at the plan. This is a plan of this statue square. What does it remind you of? A Moderne building, painting. Okay. So this statue square, the modern version, the version that we have today, is a very modern piece of design. Okay. And then another iconic modern piece of architecture, Jardine House. Okay, you can call it minimalist. So you see the attempt to make minimal element. So what's the biggest feature of this building? It's this rounded window. I think there's a very rude name for this building, right? It's the building of 1,000 A-holes. And you see, in Central, the kind of Miss Vendero inspired building, all over the place. Other kinds, the glass box. Okay, so finally, let's finish. I'm going to show you a little clip to wrap up, what has been mentioned in this talk today, and this is a pretty good clip. Không bother. Cầm.
Okay, you click duplicate.
Duplicate. Okay.
Mid-century modern architecture is a term used to describe a trend in American architecture that started in the mid-1930s and lasted into the late 1960s. Mid-century modern architecture was sleek and sexy. It was flat roofs and sloped roofs. It was glass towers, steel frames, and concrete columns. Mid-century modern architecture was the manifestation of the future with no thoughts of the past. It was optimistic, it was a lifestyle, it was technology. It was how people lived in America when the sky was the limit. But in order to understand mid-century modern architecture, you first have to understand that the evolution of modern design started with a transformation in building materials in the late 19th century, notably structural steel, reinforced concrete, and glass. The only thing needed at this point was a new attitude that would release designers from the traditions of the past and inspire them to look for a new way of thinking. Doing just that was the Bauhaus in Germany.
Oh, Bauhaus is both a place and an idea. And both the place and the idea were the work of architect Walter Gropius. Gropius was one of the so-called fathers of the modern movement, one of the first of his generation to explore open spaces and new materials. By the post-World War I period, Walter Gropius was well established as an architect, and he had an opportunity to create a new kind of art school. Training in the arts up to that point, particularly in the European sector, had been very firmly segregated. There were the fine arts. There were the applied arts. Architecture was still finding its voice as a discipline. Gropius didn't believe that those segregations of knowledge and practice made any sense in a modern age when all buildings should be practical, economical, and functional. Gropius was asked by the Weimar Republic to create a new school where he could, in fact, employ his beliefs, and that was the Bauhaus.
Form ever follows function is the phrase coined by architect Louis Sullivan that called to task the role of the architect. Prior to the modern era, the exterior of a building was an expression of styles of past traditions. But near the turn of the 20th century, a new attitude was developing that the exterior of a building should reflect the function of the interior. The idea of form follows function was a founding principle of modern architecture.
Form and function. A library, how can a library be made to look like a library? How can the function of the building be expressed through its form? How can the use of the building, be it a library or a church or a courthouse or a store, express what's happening on the interior? Does it feel like it's expressing what it was intended to do?
Attempting to answer that question was Arkansas native and world-renowned architect Edward Durrell Stone in his design for the Fine Arts Center. The center was inspired by the idea of the Bauhaus and integrated music, fine art, and theater under a single roof. The design reflects the form follows function credo of the modernists, with simple lines and lack of unnecessary ornamentation. Opened in 1951, the Fine Arts Center is a local interpretation of the international style, which Stone embraced early in his career.
That's a classic modern project. It's very much molded on the international style vein. So it's very similar to work that Walter Gropius, the great modernist, did in the Bauhaus, and another project that he did just a year or two earlier up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the Harkness Commons. It's one of a number of significant modern institutional projects, of which MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art, was the first one. This one's probably the last one.
I'm going to fast forward this,
in
okay?
1949.
Otherwise it'll take forever.
And that was just a few years.
In modern architecture that embraced functionality, simple forms, clean lines, and open spaces. It emerged in concert with Gropius and Bauhaus and was inspired by the modern materials of structural steel, reinforced concrete, and glass. It was called the International Style because it didn't reflect an established cultural history. It didn't look German. It didn't look French. It crossed borders. A building of the International Style would look the same in Switzerland as it would in Mexico. The movement sought a standard for architecture based on utopian aspirations of an equal society, in which class distinctions within the built environment were minimized.
The difference between Beaux-Arts style and International style is that Beaux-Arts was centered on the old.
Okay, let's fast forward.
Sometimes difficult to pin movement time.
It's not burdened, these models.
40s. In the 20s and 30s, architects were just beginning to explore the revolutionary ideas of the International Style. If you look through a book on modern architecture, it's easy to find images of buildings that look out of place for the times in which they were built. There's the Steiner House by architect Adolf Loos, the Lovell House in Los Angeles by Richard Neutra, the German Pavilion in Barcelona by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, and the Villa Savoy by Le Corbusier. None of these buildings seem to fit the world as it existed at the time. Even more remarkable are these drawings. Sketched on photographs are designs for buildings completely anachronistic to their surroundings. Conventional understanding suggests glass and steel buildings were products of the post-war era, but they were being conceived more than 20 years earlier. This is the work of Mies van der Rohe, a German architect who immigrated to the United States in the late 1930s and exerted a profound influence on how modern design took shape in America. Warren Seagraves is one such architect who was influenced by Mies.
Well, if you're familiar with the work of Mies van der Rohe, including the Deco building here in Fayetteville, the steel frame is exposed there in a 4 or 5 story building, but the infill, instead of being brick, is slate, which is perhaps a little bit of innovation, a little bit of tweaking on Seagraves' part. So the relationship in terms of materials, in terms of articulation, the way the space is laid out, very similar to what Mies did.
Whenever he took that Miesian kind of agenda and applied it in a local way, where he had to negotiate, the work stands on it by itself. It becomes Warren Seagraves rather than Mies. Seagraves' best work distinguishes itself when it has to deal with local circumstance. In this case, a sloping site. It has flat sites, but his best projects, I find, are when he has to negotiate.
Okay, anyway. So, and I can't seem to get out of this video, but anyway, this is the last part of the lecture. So, thank you. I've left the folder with the frame clip and the PowerPoint on the desktop. So if you have a memory stick, feel free to copy it if you want it. Okay, any question? It's late, you know. Maybe better to go for dinner. No question? Stacy, do you have a question earlier? No.
You've blown us all away.
Okay. So I hope that will give us a little bit more understanding about modern heritage, architectural heritage in Hong Kong. And these few days, the big news, you know, in Hong Kong, I mean, as far as conservation is concerned, not politics, is about the former Shaw Studio. It's being redeveloped. I think a property developer in mainland China has bought the land and is going to demolish everything, almost everything, for luxurious apartment housing. And so this is featured in newspaper. And then Lynn DiStefano, our Lynn DiStefano, and has submitted a pretty long letter to the Antiquity Advisory Board, asking them to look at this carefully before they make a decision. Shaw Studio, 邵氏片場 Yeah, that's right. So what I'm talking about is that the Shaw House, you know, in the Shaw Studio is a slightly idiosyncratic form of modernism. Okay. So I can't place a style, but look at it, you know, it's kind of like a little bit Art Deco, but at the same time it's a little bit modern, you know, and it's designed by Eric Cumming, and it's one of Hong Kong's early post-war, or rather one of Hong Kong's first generation post-war architect. And Eric Cumming is famous for some very good example of modern architecture, including, well, his most famous one has been demolished, which is Song Oak Chin, the Song Oak Estate. You know, that was planned by him, and a number of blocks were designed by him. And I think he also designed Hoyin LEE. What's the English? Ocean Terminal. Yeah, the long strip, you know, that extend out from into the Victoria Harbour, where sometimes you see big ships, you know, cruise ship. And it's private property. I don't think so. Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah. Okay. Another question? No. No, okay, thank you.
Thank you.